Hi everyone, this is going to be the voiceover for cellular respiration. So this will be the last chapter for test number 2. So one of the things that we were talking about in our last chapter on metabolism is that chemical reactions are going to be the breaking or making of bonds, chemical bonds. And in order to do this, that's going to take energy. So energy comes in a lot of different forms, and we know that the energy provides the ability to do work. So if we look at this from a living cell's perspective, living cells have to do work. They have to do chemical reactions. They have to do transport. So they need energy. So in simple terms, life is work. They have to have energy in order to work, in order to accomplish the overall characteristics of life. And one of the things that I talked about in our very first lecture is that energy flows through ecosystems. Typically, it comes in as sunlight, so energy in as light, and then it's going to leave as heat. And remember, in our last chapter, you should already know why it's leaving as heat. With every energy conversion, you increase the entropy of the universe, which is disorder. That's because every energy conversion is not efficient, and you always lose heat energy out. So photosynthesis is the process of how to capture that light energy and then turn it into chemical energy. Chemical energy can then be used for different things, and what we're going to focus on is cellular respiration, how animals or other plants even can take the energy that they made or gotten from eating something and convert that into a different form of chemical energy, which is useful, called ATP. So this chapter really boils down to understanding how ATP is made. So this diagram illustrates the fact that you have energy coming into the system as light. Photosynthetic organisms are going to take that and grab that light energy and convert it into chemical energy. That chemical energy of organic molecules are going to be things like glucose, for instance. Now something else, whether it's the plant, a fungus, an animal, is going to grab that chemical energy, and then using something like a mitochondria along with oxygen, they're going to convert that into a new form of chemical energy, ATP. And when we make that ATP, we can use that to drive the processes that need energy. So remember, ATP breaking that is going to release energy, and we can use that to drive the chemical reactions or the processes that need energy. So breaking this is going to be an exergonic reaction, and that can drive endergonic reactions. But in all of these processes, converting energy from chemical, from light to new chemical, you're always losing energy out as heat. So in is light, out is heat. So as we look at cellular respiration, what we're going to basically be looking at are catabolic processes. And this is something you guys should remember. Catabolic reaction is where you're going to break things down. And by breaking things down, you can release energy out. So we're going to combine several different processes that are central to the idea of cellular respiration and build them all into this, interrelated pathway. So since this is a catabolic pathway, breaking things down, it's also an exergonic reaction, which is the release of energy. And that energy is going to be coming out in the form of ATP. And the other thing, of course, is heat. So when we look at this process, we're going to look at a couple different ones. We're going to go over the process of fermentation. So fermentation is when an organism partially degrades that sugar down without using oxygen. And out of that, they're going to get some sort of byproduct that could be alcohol, for instance. We're also going to talk about two forms of respiration. You're going to have aerobic and anaerobic. So in aerobic, it implies with oxygen. So aerobic respiration will use oxygen, and then there can also be anaerobic respiration that does not use oxygen, so compounds other than oxygen. Anaerobic without oxygen, aerobic with oxygen. At the end of the day, when we look at cellular respiration, it's actually both these pathways here built together into one. So as we look at cellular respiration, I just stated that it has both aerobic, which is with oxygen, and anaerobic, which is without oxygen steps. So with and without oxygen are both going to happen in this process. So when we look at cellular respiration, you typically follow the chemical reaction using glucose. Realize that it's the easiest way to follow, but you can burn other carbohydrates other than glucose. You can also burn fats and proteins. But glucose is the one we'll follow because it's the easiest and most straightforward. So this is a reaction you guys definitely have to know for the test. This is cellular respiration. So when you're doing cellular respiration, you have glucose coming in with oxygen, and then out of that, you're going to get carbon dioxide, water, and then, of course, the energy. And that energy comes in two forms, ATP and heat. Okay, so this is one part where people tend to get a little bit lost. You have to understand that cellular respiration is a type of chemical reaction called a redox reaction. And a redox reaction means that there is both an oxidation and a reduction that's occurring in this process. So when you have something that's being oxidized, you're losing an electron. That's the key to know. Oxidation is the loss of an electron. You also have this process of reduction, and that's when something gains an electron. And once again, that's the key thing to know. A reduction gains an electron. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. If I reduce, why am I gaining? Well, think about electrons. Electrons have a negative charge. The reason it's called reduction is because when you gain an electron, you're reducing the charge of the molecule. So as we go through this process, it's just a giant redox reaction. There's reductions and oxidations that are occurring. In other words, there's molecules losing electrons, there's molecules gaining electrons, and that's going to be the key to cellular respiration. It's following the electrons. And just so you guys know, for those of you that go on and take Bio 102, we'll do this same thing with photosynthesis, and it will be following electrons once again. So let's look at an example of oxidation reduction. So this is a made-up generic reaction. So we have molecule X, molecule Y. Molecule X has the electron here. If we look over here, molecule X does not have the electron. So if it lost the electron, that means it was oxidized. Remember, oxidation is the loss of an electron. Now, if we look at molecule Y here and molecule Y here, it now has the electron. So if it gained the electron, when it gained an electron, it was reduced. So gaining an electron is a reduction. Oxidation is the losing of an electron. Now, realistically, you never see a chemical reaction where you can actually see the electrons. So here's an example of another type of chemical reaction. So we have sodium and we have chlorine. So we have sodium and chlorine. We can look at them on this side. We have a sodium ion and we have a chloride ion. So Na is now positively charged, Cl is negatively charged. Well, how do you know that that was oxidized? Remember, oxidation is when you lose an electron. Well, if you lose the electron, which is negative, wouldn't that make you more positive? And down here, when you look at the chlorine, and then we look at it over here, it's negative. So if you gain an E minus, that means you become more negative, and that's called reduction. So if you see the charge, then you'll know what was oxidized and reduced. If it becomes positive, it was oxidized. If it becomes negative, it was reduced. Now, to complicate things even further, in a lot of chemical reactions, you don't even see a charge. In this reaction here, for instance, there's no positive and negatives to indicate where those electrons went. So here we have methane, CH4, and we have oxygen, and then over here we have carbon dioxide and we have water. The question is, how do we know it was become oxidized? So this obviously is telling you that the methane becomes oxidized. And this is telling you the oxygen becomes reduced. But how would we know that? Remember, it's all about following those electrons. However, we can't see the electrons in this reaction. So if we can't see the negatives or the positives, or we can't see the actual electrons like E minus and where it's going, then let's look at something else. Remember, this is negative. What's attracted to negative? Positives. What's the most readily available positive? A hydrogen ion. So if we look over here in methane, notice how there's hydrogen, and we follow that carbon over to this other side, and look, the carbon doesn't have any hydrogen around it anymore. So those H's, which would come free as that, left. Why did the H plus leave? Because it was following wherever the E minus went. And if it lost an E minus, then it lost its H pluses. That means it was oxidized. In this case here, we have oxygen. We go to this side. Now there's hydrogen with that oxygen. Well, why did the oxygen gain H pluses? Because they wanted to follow the E minuses. So if the oxygen gained E minus, then it also gained the H plus. So that's an easy way to help tell. If you go into chemistry, maybe you can use that. But you just have to understand, follow the hydrogen, because that tells you where those electrons went. Okay, so what does any of that mean for what we need to know? Well, once again, cellular respiration is an oxidation reduction. So here we have glucose, here we have oxygen, and out of that we're going to get carbon dioxide, water, and then of course the energy comes out. So in this case we have C6H12O6. We follow that carbon over here, there's CO2. Lost H plus because lost E minus. It was oxidized. In cellular respiration, glucose is oxidized. Here we have oxygen. We follow that over here. Here is the oxygen with water. It gained H plus because it gained E minus. And if it gained an E minus, that means it was reduced. So the glucose is oxidized and the oxygen is reduced. Okay, so one of the things I said you're going to have to know about cellular respiration are where those electrons go. So we're going to follow glucose, we're going to follow how it gets broken down, but out of it are going to be electrons, and those electrons have to be carried around. And that's the importance of this molecule right here. This is a molecule you have to know. I'm not worried about either the oxidized or reduced state of it. I just want you to know this right here, NADH. And it's fine to use that abbreviation. It actually stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or just simply say NADH. And what I want you guys to know is NADH has a very important job to do. It carries electrons. So this is carrying the E minuses, or you could say it's an electron carrier. You don't have to know the structural formula for it or the molecular formula for it, but this is the NADH, and the key to the NADH is it's carrying electrons. That's simply what I want you guys to know. NADH is an electron carrier. You're going to see it, you're going to have to know it. There'll be some diagrams where I point it out. You'll even have to know numbers and how many of them there are. So in this process, one of the things that I'm going to go into a lot more detail about is we're going to take electrons from certain molecules and then we're going to pass them down a series of proteins. Those proteins we're passing them down are called an electron transport chain. So electrons have different states of energy. When an electron is in a high energy state and you pass it, it will gradually let that energy go over time. If you can harness that energy, you can get use out of it. If you can't harness it, it just comes out all at once. But we're going to pass electrons and harness their energy. So once again, just to visualize, here we're looking at energy, free energy. And if you have the electrons dropping out, they release the energy all at once. If you have the electrons going step by step by step by step by step, you can harness that energy out into things like ATP. So this is the difference between, let's say, fire or combustion and cellular respiration. That's what I mentioned last class, that a combustion is an uncontrolled release of energy, whereas cellular respiration is controlled. So why aren't our cells bursting into flames? Because we take it step by step by step, harnessing that energy out using things like enzymes.